But America's goal is really always China focused, and pretty much everything we've seen from the Trump White House has been with one eye on China. Why does that matter? Well, this is a battle for geopolitical dominance.
That is the voice of Andrew Fox, and we have a fascinating conversation today about the many layers to this conflict between America and Iran. But first, I'd like to indulge in a self-congratulatory moment. We, me and my team, put out our first audio podcast 5 hours after this war began on Saturday, February 28th. Today is a minor miracle that we are able to publish a full audiovisual podcast. I spoke today, Thursday, March 5th, with the amazing Andrew Fox, military man, legal scholar, expert on international law of conflict, and also a great guy. With Andrew, today, we get into the big global picture about this war, most definitely being about managing Iran's nuclear ambitions, but also containing China's dreams of global economic dominance. Yes, it's complicated, and I could think of no one better to unpack this with than my good friend, Mr. Andrew Fox. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Thursday, March 5th. I can't believe it's actually the 5th, 6th day of the war. I've lost track of everything. Time, days. Andrew Fox, it's so great that you are speaking to us today at State of Tel Aviv and beyond. Wonderful to see you.
Always a pleasure to join you.
And I have to share with our listeners, we may have viewers too. I don't know if I'll be able to pull off the full AV production guys in the shelter with 5 kids, but Andrew had me laughing pretty much the last 5 or 10 minutes before we turned on record, which I thank you for, Andrew. I needed that.
You're welcome. Well, people probably don't realize that we're actually friends as well. So we have a good amount of banter. So it's all good.
We do have banter, but it's also, I haven't laughed that hard or much in a few days, and it feels great. Like my facial muscles still work and all that stuff.
That's just my natural charm. What can I say?
Okay, so we've been doing our best to put out something every day to keep people informed. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get something out, I think it was Tuesday, but got it out last night. And today, what I want to talk to you about, Andrew, is the bigger picture. There's been so much focus, and rightly so, on the initial attack, the waves of missiles that have come at Israel, but not only Israel, pretty much every country in the Middle East and beyond, including Turkey last night, if I'm not mistaken. You mentioned when we were chatting Azerbaijan, they took a thwack at Azerbaijan. Lots going on. But let's set the stage. I don't want to focus operationally on what's going on inside Iran. I'm going to be doing that with Jonathan Conricos in the next couple of days. I want you to zoom out and give us the bigger global picture. What is this war about? Yes, it's about Iranian nukes and ballistic missiles, but it's about a lot more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's very hard to penetrate through the White House press conferences because they're never quite straight. They're politicians, of course, they're not. But I think the first thing is that there's 2 players here. There's Israel, first up, and Israel has a very clear goal to rid itself of the enemy that attacked it on the 7th of October, to make sure that that Iranian regime can't be a threat to Israel ever again. So that's a very straightforward kind of goal that Israel's got. I think regime change would be a nice to have for them, but you can't guarantee that. You can guarantee that you delete their capabilities and delete their government. So that's all fairly achievable. The Americans, they're not doing this out of pure altruism just because they love Israel. I think that's the first thing to put out there. It's certainly a useful byproduct that Israel has their goals and America has their goals, and they do complement each other perfectly at this point. But America's goal is really always China focused, and pretty much everything we've seen from the Trump White House has been with one eye on China. Why does that matter? Well, this is a battle for geopolitical dominance. China has spent the last 20 odd years buying its way around the world with the Belt and Road Initiative. Huge amounts of influence, huge amounts of infrastructure investment in Africa, South Asia, and of course then there's the Pacific threat as well, which is really the focus, I think, of Washington's concerns, not only with Taiwan, but also the South China Sea. And China really want the South China Sea because it's that choke point that goes towards, that speaks to their trade routes. So it all comes down to trade in the end, very much like 18th century mercantilism.
Trade and oil supply, no?
Yeah, and that's what was leading me on to. So the oil supply is clearly vital. China is an importer of fossil fuels. Unlike America, which is, of course, energy self-sufficient, China has to import tons of its oil. A lot of it came from Venezuela, and clearly Trump has conducted not even a regime change, just a leadership change in Venezuela. The whole hideous apparatus of the Venezuelan state is still in place. They've just got a leader in Delcy Rodriguez who is Washington facing rather than Beijing facing, and that's good enough. But add Iran into that picture. If you can get somebody in Tehran who is American facing rather, or even American neutral rather than China adjunct, then that gives America certainly influence over a good 20% of China's incoming oil supply, which is huge. And then when they go to the negotiating table next month, I believe, that's going to give Washington a much stronger hand when it comes to those negotiations with the Chinese. So there's a much bigger geostrategic picture at play here. The interesting moment will come towards the end of this operation, I suspect, when Israel might have slightly differing strategic aims than Washington, and that conversation will be an interesting one to track and monitor.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But I tend to accept this sort of explanation that they each have very compelling reasons for being in this war, Israel and the United States. Israel obviously would not likely have started a war without American leadership. There are different views on that, but America is leading this war. There's no question. And America, fire, sea, air, everything, power is really one of the main reasons. It's the reason that this is going so spectacularly well from the America slash Israel slash Western point of view. But the overarching kind of thing, as you say, is the dominance of global trade, economic activity. And at the core of that is oil. China is able to ship its cheap products around the world very inexpensively because oil's so cheap and it's been so cheap for so long. I remember Jeff Rubin, a Canadian economist, writing, gosh, 20, 30 years ago, saying, it was in the early 90s and saying this is not going to last. So get ready because at some point oil prices are going to shoot up and China's products, which aren't usually as good quality, are going to no longer be available cheaply. We're still waiting for that to happen. And that's one of the things that kind of like almost monopoly on consumer goods and other things that President Trump wants to break that lock, right? He's done it in many ways. He's gone at American companies to do business in China and talked about super tariffing their products. But back to the military picture, which is what you know so much better than me. There are many risks in this war, and one of the big ones was President Trump ordering the U.S. naval power that had kind of been congregated, amassed in the South China Sea as a show of force to protect Taiwan from threat of a Chinese attack. He's moved pretty much all of that naval power, which includes air power, to the Middle East. And talk a bit, if you will, about what that does to Taiwan and what could possibly transpire there while America's kind of preoccupied in the Middle East.
Probably useful to start with just a little context that Taiwan is considered part of China by Beijing. It goes back to the revolution, the Kuomintang, and Beijing has long harbored the hope of bringing Taiwan back into sort of Chinese mainland control. And we are seeing numerous capabilities being developed by the Chinese, numerous military exercises being run that all seem focused towards a seaborne assault on Taiwan. Why does Taiwan matter to the West? One very simple answer is everything that you're watching this on or listening to this on, every time you go on social media, that's all semiconductor related technology. And if Taiwan were lost, you can forget about getting an update to your iPhone anytime soon. That's how important for global technology Taiwan is. The Americans are working at getting their own semiconductor factories up and running, but they're not quite there yet. So Taiwan has the monopoly, but also the ecosystem that goes around it. So it's not just the semiconductors, it's all the factories that build them, the logistics around it. It's the whole industry of development that sits around it as well. So a loss of Taiwan would be absolutely huge. Now, if you're China looking at the Middle East right now, it's a tricky time for China. They're doing a big purge at the moment. They've gone full communist. They've purged half their military leadership, and they're in a position of transition. And I do wonder if that did factor into American risk calculus. Yes, they have potentially weakened their military standing in the Pacific by moving all these assets to the Middle East, but China's not exactly in the right place to do anything about it right now. So that, I think, potentially played into the thinking. And on top of that, America is depleting its missile stocks and supplies. There was talk last night that they're switching to passive bombs rather than the high precision ones. That's one of two things. Either they've worked their way through the target deck where they don't need that level of precision, or they're running low on the precision munitions. It could be one of the two. I don't know which, and obviously they're never going to release that publicly. Likewise, air defense stocks. Thankfully, the Americans have been very successful, and of course the Israelis, in hunting those missile launches and stopping the missile strikes and the drone strikes. They've both gone down hugely over the last 5 days. It's like the 12-day war, but on steroids because the Americans were involved. It's happening even faster than it did last summer. This is good news because interceptor stocks around the Gulf, around the region, are not finite. Sorry, are not infinite. They're on the first day, if that had been maintained, we'd be looking at maybe a week for the UAE or maybe 4 days for Qatar. The fact that these launch rates have dropped off so much buys the war so much more time. So I'm looking at, but the stocks will deplete, and I'll be looking at that too if I'm China. But I don't think they're in a position quite yet to launch on Taiwan due to their own internal pressures.
So when you talk about depletion of stocks, of course, you're talking about the Americans who have moved from using more precise weapons, bombs, to less precise,
Yeah,
correct?
the big heavy 2,000 pounders. No, it could just be that the
Right.
targets need. It could just be the targets need 2,000 pound bombs, which is
Correct.
entirely feasible. We just have to keep an eye on it. That's all we can do as observers and analysts, is just try and pick out trends. At the moment, we've just got a single data point, so it's not enough to make any conclusions.
So, just for our listeners, viewers, we will be having a podcast discussion with Jonathan Conricos in the next couple of days, and we'll be getting into that kind of detail with him about some of the weapons that are being used now by Israel, the change in tactics. We'll be focusing on Israel, of course, but also getting into America. So, Andrew, back to what's been going on the ground and in the world. Again, one of the things that we were talking about, and I confess we had a little chuckle over this, was the way in which the Iranians are shooting and have been shooting at everyone since, I think, day two. I can't think of a Middle Eastern country that they have not hit with missiles. In the last few days, they've also gone at Azerbaijan, which is a fun one, and Cyprus, and they finally sent drones, I believe, into Turkey. There have been people who've been trying to read some kind of, brilliant strategy into all of this kind of scattergun approach, bombing Qatar, sending missiles to Qatar and the UAE and the Saudi Arabia. And there are people like me who look at it, and I'm not a military expert, but you are, and who say, this shows a headless military and civilian government. There's no command. You've got all these pockets probably of IRGCs just doing stuff. I don't think it's more elegant than the way I just put it. What about you?
There's very clear reporting that they've had a standing order in place in Iran for a long time that if the leadership gets decapitated, then the lower level IRGC commanders have the latitude to basically carry on the war without instructions from the top. And that looks very much like what we're seeing now. I think perhaps they did have a strategy to try and, there's a reason the UAE have taken the most incoming on this war, even more than Israel has. And I think they're deliberately trying to hit those Dubai skyscrapers and force a stop to the war, or at least cause so much damage that this war becomes financially unviable. And that's why I think you've seen potshots taken at Aramco in Saudi Arabia. And of course, the Jumeirah plant in Iraq has stopped production for the meantime. So there is potentially some strategy there, but a lot of this, I think, is lower level IOGC commanders who aren't on the strategy and they're just getting everything they can.
When you said that they've been going at the UAE, which has even been taking more hits than Israel, you
Yeah,
didn't.
they've taken more incoming rounds than Israel has.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Mm.
But it taking more missile hits than Israel.
Not hits, but incoming missiles. They've shot down most of them. And I think they're on 3 killed and 63 wounded last time I saw. But yeah, they've had more incoming rounds than Israel has. Yeah.
And the logic to that would be to just get the UAE to say we're neutral, we're not playing.
Or to say, America, stop, we can't afford this," or to try and exhaust their interceptor stocks, or to hit, I don't know, the Burj Al Arab or something and
Right.
cause such iconic damage that the war becomes too expensive to continue prosecuting. There's a number of potential options.
Unbelievable. So they did hit some very strategic, iconic targets in the UAE and Dubai very directly. So they used their best there, which tells us something. But unfortunately for the Iranians, their sort of strategy or hope has backfired.
Oh, it's had
It's
the opposite effects. Yeah, absolutely.
carry on. Pardon me for interrupting you.
I was gonna move on to a point that's been amusing me for a couple of days. And, we talk about Israel's success in the 12-day war. We talk about the successes they've had during this war, and there's a sort of narrative that, Israel is this incredible apparatus and that they've done amazingly well. I've got an alternative theory, and it's just that the Iranians are complete morons. That's my alternative theory. I mean, the decision making that we've seen over the last month really has been quite remarkable because look, the Iranians know how this goes with negotiations. Trump gives them a deadline. If they don't meet the deadline, they get smashed. That's exactly what happened in the 12-day war. Rather than learn any lessons from that, a lot of analysts, and me included, beforehand were like, oh, they'll look at what happened during the 12-day war. They'll learn the lessons. They'll adapt. Persians are clever people. Like, none of that's happened. None of it has. The supreme leader deciding to hold a meeting on the surface with two carrier groups parked off in the Gulf and knowing that the negotiations had failed the day before. It's like, dude, like, how stupid are you? They've just
And the
been
people
making these
around.
mistakes over and over again. It's absolutely remarkable.
It's not by accident that the White House has chosen to deploy Steve Witkoff, of course, who was one of the main negotiators with Jared Kushner with the Iranians. And Steve Witkoff did the rounds over the last few days, kind of, leaking out in each different show or interview that he did really critical details. And I think that what I'll do right now is show one of those clips. We're now going to show a brief clip from Steve Witkoff's recent interview on Fox News, in which he told the world about the extreme intransigence and arrogance of Iranian negotiators.
So, percent material, Sean, can be brought to 90%. That's weapons grade, in roughly 1 week, maybe 10 days at the outside. The 20% can be brought to weapons grade inside of 3 to 4 weeks. And let me say this, because I forgot this small little detail. In that first meeting, both the Iranian negotiators said to us directly, with no shame, that they controlled 460 kilograms of 60%, and they're aware that that could make 11 nuclear bombs, and that was the beginning of their negotiating stance. So they were proud of it. They were proud that they had evaded all sorts of oversight protocols to get to a place where they could deliver 11 nuclear bombs.
Now, back to my discussion with Andrew Fox. So, you can see and hear from that clip that the Iranian leadership was clearly convinced that they could rag the puck on this, negotiate their way through as they had done with previous administrations. As you say, not really kind of, processing that President Trump operates differently, and making it very clear that they've been just forging ahead to develop nukes and other weapons, and no one was really going to stop them. So the negotiations were really kind of all for show. But back to your point about the supreme ayatollah, supreme leaders, supreme arrogance to hold this meeting in the morning with others above ground. He was sure if there's going to be an attack, it's going to be in darkness, which originally it was going to be in darkness until when intelligence was received that they'd actually moved this meeting and were holding it at, I think, 9:30 in the morning in Tehran. And that changed everything, including the start of the attack. Supreme arrogance. I wanted to share this brief clip of Secretary of State Marco Rubio commenting in recent days on exactly the point that Andrew Fox makes next in our discussion. Rubio is talking about the extremist religious leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran and the danger of allowing them to possess nuclear weapons.
Listen, let me explain to you guys this in simple English. Okay? Iran is run by lunatics, religious fanatic lunatics. They have an ambition to have nuclear weapons. They intend to develop those nuclear weapons behind a program of missiles and drones and terrorism that the world will not be able to touch them for fear of those things. And this is the weakest they've ever been. Now is the time to go after them. The president made the decision to go after them, take away their missiles, take away their navy, take away their drones, take away their ability to make those things so that they can never have a nuclear weapon. That's why the president made this decision. It was the right decision, and the world will be a safer place when these radical clerics no longer have access to these weapons. You see how they're using them now. Imagine how they would use them a year from now if they had more of these.
Now, I don't want to steal Fox's thunder, but he does make the point very crisply indeed. Rubio's statement, however, was just too good not to use. Back to Andrew Fox now.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to that insane fundamentalist mindset. The psychology of this is really interesting. They just don't think the way we do. You know, they believe in their divine mission. They think that somebody above is looking after them, and if something bad happens to them, then that was meant to happen anyway, so it's fine.
Yeah.
You know, they just do not think like we do, and it leads them to make these incredibly stupid decisions. That has just been the biggest gift to the Israeli-American war effort you can possibly imagine, dislocating and taking out their entire chain of command in the first minutes of the war. What a gift. And then the Iranians gave it to them on a plate. It's just remarkable.
The war started, of course, on Saturday morning, and I'm pretty sure it was the briefing with the IDF spokesperson on Monday. Might have been Sunday, midday. So, I mean, while we're on the topic of not very bright leadership, or leadership that seems not to understand kind of reality, let's
Oh, I
move
know
to...
where this is going. This is a great segue. You've done that beautifully.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and his conduct from the beginning of this war and how he's conducted himself. And he has so poked the bear, that being President Trump, so unnecessarily. But give us a rundown on Sir Keir, and who seems not to understand that jihadists really do see the world and think very differently.
Yeah, well, Starmer's played this in a way designed. He could not have designed it any better to make him look weak and vacillating. It's really astonishing example of how not to do politics. So his initial position was, no, America, you can't use our bases because we don't have legal standing under international law, which is a fine position. Like, if that's what you believe, cool. At least it's a decision. He then changed his mind after we were attacked in Cyprus at Alaria Vakatiri, and now they can use it for some things but not others. And the UK is now going to put jets in the air to defend Jordan and Qatar, but they're not going to take part in the operations in Iran. And it's exposed a number of things. First of all, it's exposed that we didn't have the right air defences in place in Cyprus when this was building up. So that's a stunning failure of government. They allowed a British airbase in Cyprus to be struck by an Iranian drone when they knew a war was coming in the Middle East. I mean, they've been shifting asset into theatre, the Americans, for weeks, and they didn't have defences in place. That, for me, is probably the biggest failure in this whole thing. And even now, we're trying to get a Type 45 destroyer down to the Mediterranean. It's going to take a good few weeks before we can get it there because it's been in dry dock. So we've embarrassed ourselves completely there. And Starmer has just taken this position that swings left and right, makes him look weak, and has pissed off the Americans, all for no end because we're doing what they wanted us to do anyway now. So it's just unbelievably mishandled by the British government.
Yeah, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Starmer said a couple days ago, okay, President Trump, you can launch attacks on Iran from our air bases in the UK. Is that
Hmm.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he might have changed that position since I last checked.
We're going to get to my guy in a minute who may out Starmer. What about Diego Garcia? Tell us a bit about Diego Garcia and what was going on
And the
there.
Chagos Islands, yeah. So we lost a case in the ICJ. I think it might have been a while ago now, like 2019 or something. That basically said we had to give the Chagos Islands, which is an archipelago in the Pacific, we had to give that to Mauritius. And instead, what's happened is we've come up with this insane deal where we're paying Mauritius to take it off us, and then we're leasing the base there back from them. Trump is threatening to torpedo that deal now because it doesn't, we've got a 99-year lease, I think. But, the Hong Kong experience shows us that these 99-year leases, when they run out, the situation might be very different than what it was when you signed the deal. So to guarantee American strategic access to Diego Garcia, it's looking like Trump might torpedo the deal. which is good. I think, I'm not the biggest fan of Trump, but if he does that, then I'll be quite happy because, yes, it puts us against international law, but frankly, I don't care at this point. The UN's degraded itself so much over the last 2 years, and international law has been so weaponized that actually I think it's time we started putting our national interest first and doing what's best for the UK rather than what's best for the ICJ.
And the plan, of course, had Starmer been more accommodating, was to do a lot of the staging for the air attacks from Diego Garcia to again on Iran. Is that correct?
Potentially some of the longer range stuff, it just brings an extra option onto the table because they can do it from America. They can fly those big B2s straight from their base on the mainland if they have to. But obviously, it makes it a lot easier if you can stage somewhere and it's
Yes,
you know
we
let
know. 37 hours, those beautiful birds. 37 hours. We heard that a lot after June 12th, and rightly so. Let him boast because it's an extraordinary achievement what the Americans were able to do. By the way, did you catch there was a little piece on the news last night about a almost dogfight, not quite dogfight, as they said on the Israeli news. The Israel just got F-35s recently. An F-35 fighter pilot over Tehran shot down
it
an
was a Yakolev 10, wasn't it? Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, then there's like, I kind of get goosebumps because his father apparently was a combat pilot in 1981 and flying then an F-16 and shot down something else that I think it was a Russian plane for the first time. So quite a
Yeah.
family.
I mean, this isn't Top Gun we're talking about. It's not like that Kuwaiti pilot who's bagged 3 F-15 kills, which is still the stupidest thing that's happened this war. I genuinely don't know how that happened. But, the Yak-10 versus F-35 is not exactly a fair shoot. But great job anyway. You can only hit the targets they put in front of you.
I want to just touch briefly on, I'm glad you raised that. I want to get into a few military-ish kind of details. One is what happened in Kuwait. You don't shoot 3 planes down by accident. The Kuwaiti army shot down 3 American, were they F-16s?
F-15s, yeah. I think there was one injury to a hand, but nobody was killed in that incident, fortunately.
Wow. What happened? What do we know?
So they're calling it a blue on blue, which is military speak for fratricide, um, for firing on your own side. And apparently, what they're reporting is that it was a miscommunication, and he mistook them for an incoming threat, prosecuted them, and down they went. I mean, very shady, very suspicious, and the fact they've clammed up so hard about it is interesting. Do I think a Kuwaiti pilot might have gone rogue and started dropping Americans? I mean, unlikely. Kuwait and America are pretty good allies. Kuwait doesn't really have an alignment with the Islamic regime. It would seem weird to me. I think it's genuinely just a catastrophic mistake from a Kuwaiti pilot that perhaps wasn't at the standard you would expect from an ally.
All right, well, we'll let that one sit. I may have a slightly different view, not militarily, but just in terms of, Kuwait's ties and loyalty to America. And also Kuwait has been very friendly to Iran, but we'll let that sit.
Okay,
Let's
let's see.
We'll see, exactly. There are so many variables that just, like public service announcement here, anyone who pretends that they know what's going on, like really knows, they don't know because nobody really.
Agreed.
And there's no one, in my view, better on the big picture stuff than Andrew Fox. So if this guy's kind of wobbling, then, there are so many variables, so many armies, so many militaries. And, we all on the outside like to look in and project, order and discipline. And very often it's kind of organized chaos, more likely. Correct, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, war is complete chaos, and people don't really understand just how chaotic it can be, especially, I suppose, when you're moving at hundreds of miles an hour, tens of thousands of feet above the ground, and you have to make split-second life or death decisions.
Was that Israeli pilot, you probably saw the video the other day, who was targeted by an Iranian missile over Tehran
Mm.
and was able to kind of dodge it, which was, pretty cool. Pretty
Yeah,
cool.
exactly.
You don't need to understand Hebrew to get how close a call this was for the Israeli pilot over Tehran the other night.
And I think one final point on this, you can only make assessments on the facts that you have. And I think if you go beyond that, you're then just speculating. And that's a dangerous place to be because we live in a heavily polluted information commons. Our social media feeds are full of lies and fabrications. And I think it's just responsible to only comment about what you know to be a fact and try not to go beyond that.
I totally concur. Qatar, has been a big supporter of Iran. And I personally was very surprised when the Iranians hit Qatar with missiles.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that? And what does it do to Qatar?
Look, the Qataris are in a unique position for them. I don't think they expected to have such catastrophic success after 7th of October, where they've taken themselves from this middle player that just did Grand Prix and World Cups and was a bit of a clown. And they've taken themselves to actually one of the main players in the Middle East in the space of 2 years. The way they're doing that is through not only spraying money around like a fire hose, but they've also positioned themselves as this stable, noble negotiator who, are the mediator for the world. And it's been a really clever bit of positioning. And then, of course, with the hostage release deal in Gaza, they effectively just got a huge bribe to tell Hamas to let the hostages go, and that bribe looked like incredible assurances of security from the United States. So Qatar's in a great place now, but I suspect, first of all, that deal with the Americans would have annoyed the Iranians. They see America as the great Satan. For Qatar to sign a defense agreement with the US would have been significantly on the sort of haram side of things, the forbidden side of things for the Iranians. So that might be a factor. But also, I think it's a symptom of that dislocation of chain of command that we spoke about, where nobody in Iran knows what they're doing and they're just banging off missiles left, right, and center. And then, of course, my initial theory is supported by the fact Ali Deed sits on, just outside Doha. It's a base that anyone who served in the global war of terror will be familiar with. We all staged through there to go to Afghanistan. So, that is a logical military target for the Iranians as well. So that's probably the main theory behind it from the Iranian side.
Before we wrap, Andrew, I have a few odds and sods that I really wanted to cover with you. One is the Strait of Hormuz. 40% of the world's oil passes through there?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. And the United States is determined to keep it open, and I assume that they're determined to keep it open in order to ensure that there's some stability in the global economy, that oil can continue to flow and there won't be an energy crisis or production crisis. But with the United States controlling the Strait of Hormuz, this is also a disaster for China. It means China no longer gets Venezuelan oil, as we already discussed. It is now going to be denied, I assume, Qatari and Iranian oil. And who steps up? Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, was in China, in Beijing, for a big show with Xi. It was mid-December, before Christmas. And his trip, coincidentally, came on the heels of the leaders of Brookfield Asset Management, where Carney had been chair of the board until he became prime minister. So, these wacky coincidences all over the world. I understand that Canada has agreed to supply China with significant amounts of oil. And of course, Canada is an energy country. That's the basis of our economy forever. But both Mark Carney and his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, refused to take oil or natural gas out of the ground to provide Western Europe in crisis, Japan, all kinds of places. But China, we're hopping to it. Carney also, just for the record, has been very similar to Keir Starmer in terms of flip-flopping. I support it, I don't support it, I kind of support it, well, maybe I don't. Like, no one can keep track anymore. I guess the big difference between Canada and the UK is that the UK actually has an army still, and an air force, and a navy. And Canada really doesn't have anything that is operational in the modern age. I think most of our equipment is dreadfully old. You probably know more about it than that.
Yeah, well, I thought we were in a bad condition until I looked at the Canadians, which is a shame because I knew the Van Doos out in Kandahar during what had been
Yeah.
about 2007. We were fans of our Canadian allies, so it's tough to see them even worse off than we are, quite frankly, because they deserve better and Canada deserves better.
I think that it's tragic. It's not sad. It's not partisan. It's tragic how degraded Canada has become in terms of kind of military capability. We were always a smaller, obviously, middle power, smaller country, not a big military power, but we had integrity and we could be relied on. And our equipment may not have been the best, but we could do useful things in terms of support roles operationally. And today we have nothing, which is really sad. And we have a prime minister who seems to be told what to do and not to do by China. And I would think that that is not going to play well in terms of trade negotiations between Canada and the United States, which have kind of gone dead. Okay, what have I missed? Anything? Big picture stuff?
Big picture. No, I think we've been around the houses quite well. I mean, I think the big question is Russia and Ukraine. That's a big one. I think that these are connected. This war has been actually quite good news for the Russians because it's given them an oil barrel boost. Now, Russia does sell at a discount anyway, so they're not getting the full barrel price, but it's gone up to, last time I checked, it was $80 a barrel. I'm not sure if it's gone up from there. I'd be surprised if it hadn't. But that is almost enough to keep Russia where they needed to be for their economic forecasting, which is really bad news for Europe and for Ukraine. But on the flip side of that, the Ukrainians, Zelensky has stepped up and said, hey, we can give you guys drone defenses because it's the drones that are getting through in the
Yep.
Middle East, not the ballistic missiles. But can we have some of your PAC-3s, the Patriot missiles in exchange, which is very well cleverly played by the Ukrainians. And, if they do get that Ukrainian drone interceptor stuff, it'll be a game changer. And I just hope they say thank you to the Ukrainians.
Well, we're going to have to maybe do another episode next week, Andrew, talk about Ukraine, Russia, just a quick update and give us some more insight into that.
And I've just got back from Kiev as well, so like,
I know, I'm very well aware. I follow you, religiously, even though neither one of us is religious. I know that's really cornball. And Andrew, thank you so much for your time today, your insights. Always a pleasure speaking with you. And I know that this is not going to resolve anytime soon. The world is going to be in a state of what? Volatility? Pick your word. Look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thanks so much, Andrew.
always a pleasure.
And that's a wrap for today. It's been one heck of a long week, and I plan to catch my breath for the next few days. We will be back early next week. Keep in mind, the week here begins on Sunday. And we'll be back with a breakdown of the war from the opening salvos to the present plans, order of targets, and where this may all be leading. During the last week, which can only be described as a full-blown crisis, we chose to make our work available to all without restrictions. Podcasts like the one you just watched will be available to premium subscribers only next week. Thanks again for listening and watching. Special thanks, yet again, to Amir White, my amazing editor and producer, who has somehow managed to step up during this past week, in spite of living in a city in central Israel that has been slammed by missiles. And as I mentioned at the outset, but it cannot be repeated too many times, truly and seriously, an unsung hero. And there are so many people like Amir and his wife and their children throughout Israel. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, Amir, and your family. And the best part about him is he does it with a killer sense of humor. Special thanks as well to Maya Naftalin, our other editor and producer and social media maven and someone who just does everything she's asked to do. And Maya stepped in graciously when Amir was indisposed, as he was much at the time this week in bomb shelters or safe rooms. We worked really hard together, me and Maya, to ensure that you received timely information. I hope that you appreciate the effort. Join us for that discussion. It will be with Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricos, a great friend of the State of Tel Aviv and Beyond podcast, and a master at breaking down complex military scenarios. Thanks so much for being here. Please, if you do not already support our work, perhaps this is the moment to take out a paid subscription or make a contribution to buy me a coffee. We are independent and rely on our listeners, and that's you, to do this work. We need the support. Information and links for how to subscribe or contribute are on our website, stateoftelaviv.com. Until next time. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN @stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.